In Chapter 8, we're going to talk about some of the different types of threats that are out there, as far as threats on the security of information systems and some of the tools that organizations and individuals can use to secure their systems. Okay. The opening case, usually I don't discuss the opening cases, but the opening case for this particular chapter is interesting. It talks about the fact that Facebook, because it is a very large, widely used network, there's been malicious attacks using Facebook. A lot of times, some of these malicious attacks look like videos or links. You know, you won't believe what her dad did when he found out. You know, something. It's something that tries to get people hooked so that they click on it. It might show a video where all you can see is a female in a bikini or something, and you click on it. It will take you somewhere. It'll flash and take you somewhere where it either gives you some kind of malicious software, or they try to get access to your account. But there have been different examples of malicious software, as well as attempts at trying to get access to networks, to systems, passwords, usernames, stuff like that. Okay, so, but it just kind of gives you a nice example of some of the security concerns that are out there. And these are the security concerns that are facing individuals. You can imagine that an organization has a lot more information, a lot more connections to that information, and that because of that, they have a lot more they have to secure. Okay? So, security as an overall principle is a set of policies, procedures, and technical measures used to prevent unauthorized access, alteration, theft, or physical damage to information system. Okay, so it's a whole set of things that an organization does to try to keep people who are not supposed to have access to their systems out. Okay? Controls are methods, policies, and organizational procedures to ensure safety of an organization's assets, to ensure the accuracy and reliability of its accounting records, which is important, and operational adherence to managerial standards. So, again, controls are ways of minimizing the threats that are out there, your exposure to those threats. Okay? There are a lot of different reasons why organizational systems are vulnerable. There's a lot of more accessibility to systems. You have access to some of these organizational systems using mobile devices, tablets, other ways of accessing them. You might have hardware problems, a breakdown of a particular server, maybe it's configured wrong, maybe there's some damage to that hardware, software problems. There might be programming errors called bugs that create vulnerabilities in the system. You might have different types of disasters, natural disasters, man-made disasters that create threats to your organization. The use of some of these networks outside the organization's control. So giving access to your systems to outside parties, your employees, customers, your supply chain partners, right? All of that outside access, providing all that outside access increases the vulnerability of your system. And then, of course, the loss and theft of portable devices, right? You hear every once in a while about a laptop that an employee took home. It was stolen out of their car, and it had customer data on the laptop itself. It had, information, right? I mean, that's actually a really big threat that organizations have to keep track of. Okay. So we can kind of look at this visual of an organizational network and take a look at some of the threats, right? On the client side, right, you have unauthorized access. somebody who's working from home, telecommuting, leaves their screen on. There's information on there that somebody shouldn't see, and others are able to see it. Right? You can't control that as an organization. Okay? When you're actually connecting through the internet, right? You might have sniffing, message alteration. Again, all of those problems because of the fact that you're using the open internet. Right? When it comes to the servers, you have different hacking, viruses, and worms. We'll talk about each one of those. Threat and fraud, vandalism. We'll talk about what a denial of service attack is. Okay? And then actually in the corporate systems themselves, you have all of these different possible threats. The theft of data, copying, making changes to or damaging data, hardware and software failure. All of those are possible vulnerabilities in these large networks. Okay? The internet itself, as a connection medium, creates a lot of vulnerabilities. The network, it's open to anybody, so anybody can utilize the internet. The size of the internet means that it has very wide impact. The internet is the largest client-server network. We talked about that already. So it creates the potential for more possible vulnerabilities. The use of fixed internet addresses with cable or DSL modems creates fixed targets for hackers. Now, when you get an internet connection at home, most of the time, you have to read the fine print, but most of the time you're getting a dynamic IP address. What that means is every time you connect to the internet, you're assigned a random unused IP address. Remember we talked about IP addresses, the dotted decimal internet addresses? For most users, this is fine. You don't need a fixed address, but if you're hosting a website, you have a server that you want others to be able to find, you have to have a static IP address, because if your address is constantly changing, nobody can find you. But if you have a static or fixed IP address, that can create a vulnerability. Right? Most organizations, you want to be online, you have to have a fixed IP address to do that. Okay? Unencrypted voice over IP presents a possible vulnerability. And then, of course, email, peer-to-peer networks, and IMs, all of those kind of one-to-one connections, those are all possible vulnerabilities. When we talk about phishing attacks with a PH phishing, email is one of the major ways that networks are attacked using these phishing attempts. And we'll take a look at an example of that. Okay? With wireless connections, you have other types of security challenges. Radio frequency bands are very easy to scan, so if you're using radio frequency to transmit data, that's a potential vulnerability. All of your wireless networks have identifiers called service set identifiers, or SSIDs. Okay? You create a new wireless network, you give it a name, and when others are searching for that wireless network to connect to, they need to know what the name is. By default, most of these routers, wireless routers, are set to transmit your SSID. You can actually, if you go into the settings, you can turn it off so that it's not transmitting the signal, and you have to actually know what the name of the signal is to find it. So you can hit other network in your device and actually type in the name of the network. That's obviously it's going to be a lot more secure if you hide the SSID. But because of the fact that these are being broadcast out there, they open up to this potential vulnerability, this potential threat called war driving. Okay, war driving is possible because wireless networks, the radio frequency waves that go, you can't necessarily control how far those networks reach. So most of the time, the networks, it goes beyond the building, possibly beyond your property. Okay, sometimes you can control how far the frequency will go, but not always. And because of that, somebody can be parked. If you have a personal network, can be parked across the street open up a laptop, find your network. If it's unsecured, they can jump right on. And unsecured means there's no password needed to jump onto that network. Okay. If you have the password system is called WEP, Wired Equivalent Privacy. The basic one is called WEP. Okay. This is the security standard. One of the problems with it is its use is optional. Okay. By default, wireless routers are not set to use WEP. You have to actually turn it on, which is, a problem. If you go and you plug in your wireless router and you don't change any of the default settings, by default it's open and it's unsecured. Okay. Uses a shared password for both users and the access point. And a lot of times, because of the fact that the use is optional, sometimes if people just open up, they turn it on, they don't secure it, it could be an issue. Okay. So this is taking a look, kind of a visual look at some of the security challenges with Wi-Fi, right? Just the fact that you have this wireless connection and that it's possible for an intruder to intercept or connect to that wireless connection. Okay. Other types of threats out there, different types of malware. Viruses are rogue software programs that attach themselves to other programs or data files. So you download a program, an exe file, you download a document, a JPEG, a PDF, any file. You open it up, you run it. That's when the virus a lot of times will be triggered. Okay. Worms are malware that replicate themselves to travel through a network. Okay, so some worms will send themselves, they'll email themselves to all of the contacts in your contact list to kind of travel through. So these types of malware, Trojan horses. A Trojan horse is a piece of software that looks like something legitimate that you actually want, but when you go and run it, there's malicious code embedded in it, just like the story of the Trojan horse that had Trojan soldiers hidden inside of it. You get something, it looks like something you want, but inside there's something you don't want. So that's the idea behind the malware Trojan horses. And again, these are the types of things that network administrators for organizations have to be concerned with, because once a virus, a worm, a Trojan horse gets access to a network, it's possible for it to spread throughout the network. Once it gets in, it's possible for it to spread. So it creates a security threat. Okay. There's other malware, including the SQL injection attacks, the data forms, web forms that are out there that you put in certain variables and hit submit to do your search. It's actually taking your variables, creating SQL code, and searching a database. SQL injection attacks use those web forms to try to get access to the underlying database. Okay? You also have spyware. These are small programs that install themselves sort of in the background of your computer. They try to monitor your web surfing activity, and sometimes they will give you excess advertising that you don't want. Spyware will sometimes, Internet Explorer is actually very vulnerable to some of these types of attacks. If you open up Internet Explorer and the user has a whole bunch of toolbars, I don't know if you've ever gone to somebody else's computer and there's a whole bunch of extra toolbars and you're not really sure, you know that all that stuff didn't come with Internet Explorer. It might mean that there's spyware that put all of these extra toolbars in there. And then of course there's keyloggers. Keyloggers will actually send every keystroke that the user puts in. It will send all of those keystrokes to a third party or just record them for somebody to get access to. And a lot of times the idea is that as you are logging into different accounts, you're putting in usernames and passwords, that if they collect every keystroke, they're going to get that data. Now, hackers and computer crime, they use your book talks about this idea of hackers versus crackers. Hackers are individuals that are trying to get unauthorized access to a system. Crackers are hackers with malicious intent. Okay, so most of the time you hear about hackers, whether they are good or bad. There are good hackers out there. They're called white hat hackers. Your book doesn't talk about them, but there are consultants that you can hire that will try to hack into your system, and they will give you a report as to all of the vulnerabilities. Here are the issues that we found when we tried to hack into your system. Right? You can actually hire people to do that. Some of the things that hackers will do just to get access to, unauthorized access to your system, they may actually do damage to your system, steal data, and get access to data they're not supposed to. They can also do what's called cyber vandalism, where they're trying to disrupt or destroy your website or disrupt the flow of traffic. Okay. Some of the other vulnerabilities that are out there, the internet vulnerabilities, spoofing is misrepresenting yourself as as somebody else, basically. Phishing attempts, phishing with a PH, which actually they talk about phishing over here. Phishing with a PH. Phishing goes hand in hand with this idea of spoofing, but it's basically setting up fake websites, representing yourself as somebody else to try to get access to personal account information and other personal information. Okay, I'll give you an example here of phishing. This is right from Wikipedia. It says, trusted bank, dear customer of, trusted bank. And I've seen, if you actually go into your spam folder, you'll probably find at least one or two of these. I was seeing PayPal and eBay were big targets of phishing attempts for a long time. Most of the time it'll tell you there's something wrong, we're putting a hold on your account, there's something wrong with your account, we need you to verify your account information. Click on this link and you need to verify it. Most legitimate businesses are not going to ask you to verify your information ever, because that's the way that criminals try to get access to your data, and they wouldn't ever do that. Okay? The way to get around these phishing attempts is to never click on any link in an email that looks fishy. If you're unsure, open up a brand new browser window, type in the URL for the business that you're trying to get access to, and go directly go that direction. Don't ever click on any of the links in the email. Okay, that's the best way to keep yourself safe from these types of attacks. You also have sniffer programs that they eavesdrop actually on the data going over a network. So if you have a sniffer program that is connected to a network, it's actually going to check all of the data instead of just the data that that is addressed to it. Okay, and these are ways for you to steal proprietary information, stealing email, company files, other types of information that is sent via networks. Now, a denial of service attack. A denial of service attack is an attack on a web server where you try to send all of these thousands or maybe millions of fake requests to a website to try to bring the website down. You're trying to keep legitimate users from getting access to that website. Okay? A lot of denial of service attacks are waged as distributed denial of service attacks. A distributed denial of service attack comes from multiple computers. Usually these computers are computers that have been hijacked. They call them zombie computers. They will be infiltrated by some kind of malware that will send those fake requests from these zombie computers. Most of the time, this malware runs in the background. You don't see what's going on. You'll notice your computer will run slower because resources are being allocated to other things that you're not, that are not what you're using it for. But there's because a lot of people don't have good up-to-date antivirus and anti-spyware software on their computers that will search for these types of threats and get rid of them. People just kind of accept that eventually your computer's just going to run slower and slower and slower, and that's just the way it is. And that's not necessarily, a lot of times if it's really slow, it's because it's infected with some kind of malware, whether it's malicious or not. Okay? Computer crime, this sort of umbrella that covers all kinds of computer crime, is any violation of criminal law that involves a knowledge of computer technology for their perpetration, investigation, or prosecution. Okay? Now, there's two different categories of computer crime. A computer can be the target of the crime, which is basically a system that you're trying to get access to, or the computer can be the instrument of the crime. The computer can be used to perpetrate the crime. Okay? Some of the different types of computer crime that are out there, different categories. Identity theft, which is stealing personal information to try to impersonate somebody else. A lot of times with identity theft, what happens is people open up accounts using somebody else's credit, in somebody else's name. They'll open up accounts, send the account information to a different address, so that if you're the victim of identity theft, unless you check your credit report, unless you actually keep up with that, it'll happen without you realizing it. You'll go to open up, to purchase an item, to apply for a loan, and you'll find out that your credit score is much lower than it's supposed to be. You check your report and you find out all of a sudden there are addresses on your credit report that you never lived at, or there's accounts that were recently opened that you didn't open, right? And that's usually how people find out. Talked a little bit about phishing already. Evil twins, this concept is the idea that you have wireless networks that try to pretend like they're trustworthy networks. Now, in my travels, I usually take my laptop, if not my iPad, with me wherever I go, and so I'm constantly searching for an internet connection. And I have been in hotel rooms where I will search for the internet connection, and I will see a generic connection that says free Wi-Fi or free internet. It's usually named something like that. And it's somebody else's device. It's actually not a router. It's not a Wi-Fi access point. It's actually somebody's device, where they're hoping you're going to just look at the name, connect to it, and give them access to your computer, right? And that's the idea. So you just have to be really careful and actually know what you're connecting to before you connect to it. Okay. Farming. They use this PH a lot. This is redirecting a user to a bogus web page, even when they put the right URL in there. Okay, the big companies like Google, they try to purchase all of the domain names of the misspellings. If you go into, you open up a browser and you put www.goggle.com, G-O-G-G-L-E instead of Google with 2 O's, it should take you to Google, because they try to purchase all of the different misspellings of their names so that so they can redirect. For those of us that don't pay attention when we're typing, we don't end up at a spoof site of Google and end up giving our information to an organization that's not Google. Okay, click fraud. This occurs a lot of web advertising is click-based. So you put banners on a web page, and you pay the organization that that hosts the banner gets paid per click every time somebody clicks in to go to, to visit that web page using that particular banner. Okay. Click fraud occurs when an individual or a piece of software is fraudulently clicking on a banner trying to basically increase the amount of money that organization is spending on marketing. Now, click fraud could actually be a competitor who is trying to weaken their competition by increasing the amount of money their competition is spending on marketing. Okay, I've been on web pages before and accidentally clicked on something, and that's not exactly the same thing. But this is when there's sort of the intent of defrauding the system. Okay, and then of course there's cyber terrorism and cyber warfare, which are basically terrorism and warfare, at a sort of a global level that is perpetrated using the internet as the medium to perpetrate it. Okay. With system vulnerabilities for large companies, you have internal and external threats. Okay. Some of the big internal threats are actually employees, and for those of you that have worked retail, you know that a big part of my my past employment history is working retail, different types of retail. And what they do a lot of times, retail locations, is they have employees watch customers and security systems that watch the employees. Because your employees have information and access, internal access to your systems that outsiders don't have. So they actually pose a pretty big threat. Sometimes things happen just because the user doesn't know any better, right? You don't have good training, somebody clicks the wrong button, they do the wrong thing, all of a sudden, data has been wiped out, deleted, changed, whatever, okay? There's also this threat to organizations called social engineering. Social engineering is individuals that pose as somebody legitimate to try to get access to systems using employees. There was a gentleman named Kevin Mitnick who, there's actually a 60 Minutes, if you go onto YouTube and search for Kevin Mitnick, 60 Minutes did a profile on him. He was a big hacker and social engineer from the 1980s. He actually hacked into most of the Fortune 500 companies at that point in time, the Fortune 500 list. He was an accomplished hacker. He was a social engineer. He could call people up, office employees, and trick them into giving their username and password. Right? You call up, you tell them that you are the help desk and you need to check something, so you need their username and password to check that, whatever, however they do it, right? But it's just this idea that you're using the employee to get access to a system you're not supposed to have access to. And actually, I think it's Mitnick Security. Kevin Mitnick, he did time in jail. He opened up a consulting firm that does that white hat hacking. They will try to penetrate your organization's security, and they will report back to you as to your vulnerabilities. Right? He actually, makes this living on all of this knowledge that he has. It's basically selling this, hackers. If you want to know where your issues are, where your vulnerabilities are as an organization, asking somebody who knows how to hack into your organization is probably a good place to start, right? You've seen movies where young hackers get thrown into federal jail, and they get a choice. You can work for the federal government as a good hacker on our side, or you can serve your federal prison sentence or whatever. I mean, stuff like that actually happens. right? But this is, you know, he's an interesting individual. If you get a chance to kind of take a look.
Wait, so he's still hacking?
He doesn't,
Yep.
I don't, you know, to be honest, he probably still is, but it's legitimate now.
So he's working with the federal government?
He has his own consulting firm, so he actually does, I don't think he's working with the government. He might have contracts with the government, but he has this whole firm where they will actually be hired by organizations to go in and try to penetrate their security and tell them, here's the ways that we were able to get in, right? They'll pay them, you know, thousands of dollars to write these reports to tell them, you know, hey, we were able to call your office workers and get their username and passwords for your systems, you know, and if we can do it, somebody else can, right? But as an organization, you know, it's probably worth it for you to know that that you have these vulnerabilities, so you can, you know, if it's an issue with your, you know, your rank and file office workers giving information they're not supposed to, it's a training issue, right? You need to train them that they're not supposed to do stuff like that, right? But yeah, he made this whole career out of basically white hat hacking, turning what he was doing. And you know, it's funny, you watch the 60 Minutes interview with him, and he's like, well, you know, I took the information, but I didn't do anything with it. I went on there and the guy who's interviewing him, he goes, look, you didn't have the authority. You trespass where you're not supposed to. I was an intellectual trespasser. You know, this was back, you know, it's a really old interview with him back right when, after he was caught. But I'm sure his view changed after a while. You know, look, what you did was illegal. It doesn't matter what you did with the information, just because you didn't take it and actually profit from the information. You stole it. You got access to these systems you weren't supposed to. It's a really interesting, I don't have time necessarily in class, but it's a really interesting interview if you look him up. Other types of vulnerabilities include software. Commercial software that organizations use, it's not economically feasible for organizations to put out completely flawless software, okay? And because software ships and is utilized that has potential bugs and other flaws in it, that's where you see patches and other updates to that software that try to kind of fix those security flaws and other issues that are in there, right? So you see patches that, I see patches a lot with Microsoft products. I'm all Mac, and the only Microsoft product really that I run is Office. And every time I connect to, connect to the security to search for any updates, there's always critical updates for that. But yeah, any updates or patches, a lot of times it's there to fix these security flaws and bugs that were found after the fact in this software. Okay. So what's the business value of security and control? There are a lot of liabilities and other issues that organizations open themselves up to if they don't have good security. A security breach that gets out to the public can actually cut into an organization's value almost immediately, right? You hear about a large security breach in an organization, and all of a sudden you're hearing about their stock price plummeting, right? I mean, these types of issues have very real financial effects for the organization. Okay, inadequate security can actually lead to downstream liability. Your book gives this example of this this company called BJ's Wholesale that that was sued because their lax security allowed hackers to get access to their systems and access to customer credit card and financial information. The hackers took that information. A lot of times hackers will sell, credit card numbers when it's used, right? I think they were sued for something, the book says something around $13 million because their lax security ended up costing the credit card companies millions of dollars in false transactions that they had to pay back, right? So companies have to invest in security, although security for most organizations, it's sort of like buying insurance, right? You buy insurance because you're forced to, right? You drive a car in Southern California, you have to have insurance on your car, you know, by law, right? You pay your premiums every month, or every 6 months or whatever. You don't see the value of it until you get into an accident and you don't have to pay for it, or until you need it, right? It's sort of a safety net. That's the same kind of idea for organizations that security is, right? Some management can see security as a black hole. You're spending money, but you have to think about what would happen if we didn't spend this money, if we didn't protect ourselves, right? You have the downstream liability and other types of issues that potentially can come up. Okay? Some of the legal and regulatory requirements in regards to how records are managed and how privacy is protected, right? HIPAA. If you haven't heard of HIPAA before, it is a law that governs how medical facilities how they have to protect your medical data. Okay, they can't share your medical data with a third party without your express written permission. Before that, they could share your medical data with whoever they wanted to. Legally, they could, anyway. The Graham-Leach-Bliley Act requires that financial institutions ensure the security and confidentiality of customer data, right? You kind of think that sounds like something they should be doing anyway, right? But these laws come into place because usually there are issues and something that, again, our U.S. System of law, a lot of times laws come into place because there's a shared, there is some kind of shared realization that something is happening that we don't want to happen, right? So you put a law into place to try to curb that activity from happening. Sarbanes-Oxley, most of you probably have heard of Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley makes forging or reporting bad financial data out to regulatory bodies or to external stakeholders like stockholders, making sure that it is accurate, that data is accurate, right? And again, that's one of those things that you think, why would you not, right? But there were a lot of abuses of the reporting of that data, and Sarbanes-Oxley makes it so that your upper level management is actually personally, criminally liable for the accuracy and the integrity of the data that's reported. Okay, because you had high-level executives that were, their companies were caught reporting bad data, and they would say, we're not the ones who do that, right? Is somebody at the, it was the accountant in our company that prepares those reports. We had no knowledge of it. Well, Sarbanes-Oxley makes it so that they have to have knowledge of what's going on in their own company and what's being reported out, because if it's bad information, they're criminally liable for that. They could actually come up with, they could actually be charged criminally. Okay? A lot of white-collar crimes, the evidence in a lot of white-collar crimes tends to be data and other information that resides on computers. So you have this whole area called computer forensics that was born, right? That is looking at collecting, examining, and authenticating, preserving, and doing analysis of data that is on computers. Different types of data, email, transactions, anything that could be used as evidence in a criminal trial. Okay, so a lot of times you see news footage of something going, something bad happening at a company, right? And you see people walking out with computers, towers and servers, right? They're taking all this stuff out of the building. That's so that they can do this analysis to try to find evidence of the crime that they're being charged with. Now, within an organization, there's two different types of controls. You have your manual and automated controls and your general application controls. The general controls, these are controls that apply to all of the systems in your organization. They're usually a combination of your hardware, software, and manual procedures to kind of create this overall control environment, how we control how we preserve our information, how we control and keep safe that information. Okay. Some of the types of general controls that organizations use include software and hardware controls, computer operations controls, data security, implementation, and administrative controls. Okay, and these are all different levels of controls. They talk about each one of these in more detail in the book. Application controls. Application controls are controls on a specific application that is used by an information system, right? So this could be your human resources system, your payroll system, your operations system, right? Controls that are at the system level, at the application level, okay? And these could be both automated and manual procedures. These might be things that you tell your employees, procedures of ways that they have to, things they have to do when they use your systems, right? And they try to make sure that only authorized data is processed by that application. And these are going to, if you remember any type of system, there's input of data, there's processing in the system, and then there's some kind of output. That's the way that every system, every application works. So you have controls at each one of those levels, the input, processing, and output controls, okay, for applications. Now organizations, when they're looking at their security, because every organization has a finite set of resources. You only have so much money to spend in the budget, right? They have to assess the different threats that are out there. So what is, and when they do these risk assessments, right, and they look at the different types of threats that are out there, the probability that it will occur, the potential losses and the value of that threat, and the expected annual loss. So over here they give a nice little example, right? The threat is a power failure. We have a 30%, they've determined a 30% probability that could happen, right? The average loss is somewhere between $5,000 to $200,000, with the average loss of about 102, 500, you know, and with 30% probability, the expected annual loss is 30,750. All right, so they kind of do this quick assessment to get an overall value of the threat to figure out, because you always want to figure out what is the asset that you're protecting, what is it worth, and what are the potential losses of the different types of exposure. So user error, you'll notice this one, user error, 98% probability. There's a really, really good chance that at some point we're going to have user error. Loss range, somewhere between $200,000 to $40,000. $200, right? Yeah, $200 to $40,000. So they kind of split the difference and say about $20,100. At a 98% probability, that expected annual loss is a little over almost $20,000, right? So that's how they do these risk assessments. And again, they have to figure out what are the different possible threats, how is it going to monetarily affect us, and how much money should we put into securing against that threat. Okay. Organizations have most organizations have an overall security policy, which is where you're ranking different information risks. And your security policy drives the other policies in your organization, your acceptable use policy. Most organizations have acceptable use policies for all the resources that they give their employees and other individuals, right? So your organization you work for gives you internet access, gives you an email address. They're usually going to have some paperwork somewhere that says these are the ways that are acceptable to our organization for you to use these resources as an employee, as a contractor, as somebody who has access to these resources. Right, that's your acceptable use policy. And then of course, authorization policies, which authorization policies look at users in different user groups, right? So I'll take the University of Laverne as an example, right? In the My Laverne system, you guys are all student users. You are all granted student access, right? And that gives you access to certain levels of information. Some stuff you can change, some stuff you can't, right? You can view your own information. Some of that information you can change, right? You can go in and you can change maybe your address and update things like that, but you can't change your grades, right? As a student user, but you can view your grades. As a faculty user, I can see students that are in my classes. I can update the grades for the students that are in my classes, right? But I can't see other faculty members' classes, right? So we have these different users in every system, and when you get a new user, you assign them a particular user type that gives them different rights within the system. Okay? And that's where we kind of come with this whole idea of identity management. Okay? But this is, again, it's authorizing different levels, different types of users within a system. This is the easiest way to handle a whole bunch of different users, right? How many, anybody know how many students currently here at the University of Laverne? 10,000, 15,000, right? You can imagine every one of them, I don't know exactly, I'm sure it's in the thousands somewhere, right? Every one of them has access to Blackboard, every one of them has access to the My Laverne system, every one of them, right? So as a network administrator, handling, 15, 20,000 users, right? You have to have a manageable way of doing that, and identity management is one way of handling that, putting people into groups and giving the whole group the same authorizations. This is an example of some of those security profiles for users, okay? And again, it's about having user groups and giving that whole group the same permissions, right? So here, a personnel clerk, department clerk in Division 1, right? Different types of data. They have no access to medical history data, salary, pensionable earnings, because they don't need that access to do their job, right? But you have this personnel manager, and they have access to employee data for their division only. Because as a manager, you should be able to see your employee data, right? But they only have read access. They can't make changes to any of it, right? So it's having these groups of users and assigning the whole group the same permissions. Okay? Within an organization, you also have to plan for what happens if you have some kind of disaster, something happens. Right? You have to do some kind of disaster recovery plan, which is a plan for what happens in the event of different types of disasters. I know over at Cal State, they usually keep these things on the wall, and it has different types of disasters and what you should do in the event of each one of those disasters. If there's if the power goes out, right? If the power goes out, we would probably end class, right? We probably wouldn't try to keep going forward. But these plans tell you what, as a member of that organization, what you should do in the event of these different things happening, right? Business continuity planning focuses on what happens after the disaster. We've gotten through the disaster. Now how do we start, how do we get operations up and running again? Okay? Looks at, now you need both of these plans need to know what are the critical systems, right? As a manager in an organization, you have to identify what are the systems that we need up and running as soon as possible to continue operations. Okay, so you have to look at all of the systems in the organization and prioritize those. Okay, and you have to look at what is the business impact of having some kind of outage, having some kind of interruption in service, right? What is that going to cost us? For some organizations, they they have so much redundancy because they just can't afford any kind of system outage. Okay, other organizations, we might be able to go a day or two without operations and it's not going to affect us as much. So it really depends from one organization to another what their business continuity plan is. Now, organizations can also do a management information system audit, where you're actually looking at your overall security system, your environment, and you're actually reviewing all of the different technologies, procedures, documentation, training, and personnel. You're looking at the whole security environment, and you are giving a report back as to if there's any weaknesses, where those weaknesses are. Sometimes these audits will actually simulate a disaster to try to see what the reactions are in a time of crisis or disaster. Okay, and through this audit, it's going to list and rank all of the weaknesses. Where are the issues in your system? Where are the things that you need to work on, right? This is an example here of an auditor's list of some of the weaknesses in an organization, right? This is the nature of the weakness and the impact. User accounts with missing passwords. So in this particular system, they have some user accounts that don't have passwords attached to them, right? Chance for abuse, yes. What's the justification? Why is it there a chance of abuse? It leaves the system open to unauthorized outsiders or attackers because there are some accounts with no passwords, right? So what do we think that management should do? The response, eliminate those accounts. Make sure there's no accounts that don't have passwords that are attached to them, right? So you have this whole list that talks about what the weakness is it an issue, why is that an issue, and what management should do about it, okay? That's just one example of what it could look like. We talked about identity management, right? But again, it's about authenticating users, protecting their identities. Now, authentication is the ability to identify an individual that you are who you say you are. And there are different ways that systems do this. The cheapest and easiest way is username and password combination. You put that in, you should be the only one that knows that information, right? So you have passwords. There's tokens, which are actually physical devices, and smart cards. These kind of go hand in hand. Anybody know what, can give an example of biometric authentication? Have you guys heard of that before? Biometric authentication has to do with something physical about you. So fingerprints, retinal scans, right? Voice prints, anything that has to do with your physical self that you are using to identify who you are, that's biometric authentication. Biometric authentication is some of the strongest authentication, but it's also very expensive. Okay, so that's why a lot of systems, unless it's an asset that is very high dollar or needs to be protected, you're probably not going to invest in biometric authentication because it is very expensive to implement. Some of the technologies include firewalls. A firewall is basically a software or a hardware that monitors traffic going in and out to try to keep unauthorized traffic from getting into places they're not supposed to. Okay. This is an example here of a potential, I think we've seen this before, this setup here, a lot of corporate firewalls, they'll set up 2 levels of firewalls for an organization to an outer firewall, which will protect the general web server, our general website that the public can see, will monitor the traffic coming in and out, right? And an inner firewall, which will be more secure because that's usually the last, some of the last protection before you get into the organization's inner resources and systems. Okay, so usually a lot of times you have this two-level firewall architecture for organizations. Some other technologies include intrusion detection systems, which actually will monitor networks to try to detect intruders. And they actually look at events as they're happening. So if you have an intrusion detection system, you can see intruders and what they're actually doing, and you have the ability to put a stop to it. Antivirus and anti-spyware software is probably one of the cheapest and most effective ways of keeping your networks and your systems safe. Making sure that you don't get infected. Now, the thing about antivirus and anti-spyware is that you have to keep it updated. You can't just buy anti-spyware and not keep it up to date. Okay, and actually Microsoft has a if you are a Windows PC person, they actually have a free antivirus, anti-malware suite that they support. It's called Microsoft Security Essentials. But it's important to have this if you're connected and you're online. I remember the very first time I connected to DSL. First broadband connection ever. I was very naive and I didn't have any antivirus or anti-spyware on my computer. Connected, within a half an hour of being connected, I had a very malicious virus that was restarting my computer. This had to have been 10, 15 years ago. It's like sort of toward the beginning of the internet. But yeah, the threat's out there, and a lot of your operating systems have firewall software that's built in, but you usually have to get your own antivirus and anti-spyware. Okay. Securing wireless networks. Now, we talked a little bit about wireless networks, and we talked about the fact that by default, these wireless networks are not secured. You take the wireless driver out of the box, you connect it. Default settings is it doesn't have any password on it. There's no security. Okay. Web security, which is basically putting a password on it, is a password on your wireless network, on your SSID. It provides some security, but it's not necessarily the strongest security. Now, there's actually two levels. Web security is the basic security. WAP 2 is stronger. The passwords for WAP 2 are, I think, twice as long as WEP. So a lot of newer routers actually offer the ability to choose between WEP and WAP 2. But the password has to be twice as long. I think it has to be something like 16 random characters, letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase, the whole mix of different random letters. But it's also encrypted when you're using Web 2. So it's stronger than even just the regular web security. So if you have the option, you can go to Web 2, but you're going to have a much longer, by default, you have a much longer password. Encryption is another way of securing data. So encryption is just transforming your data into a cipher that can't be read by anybody that doesn't have the key to decrypt that data. Okay, and there's two different methods for encryption. Secure Sockets Layer, SSL, and the Transport Layer Security, TLS, is actually replacing Secure Sockets Layer, or Secure Hypertext Transfer Protocol, SHTTP. So each one of these are both methods for securing data on web pages. Okay. When it comes to sending your data, there's two different methods of encryption. You have symmetric key encryption, which means that if I'm sending data to you guys, we both have the same key. It's not as secure as public key encryption. With public key encryption, if I'm receiving encrypted data, I have a private key that can decrypt data, and I give anybody who wants to send encrypted data to me my public key. So you have my public key, you can encrypt the data, but only I have the private key that can decrypt it. Okay, so there's two different, with public key encryption, there's two different keys instead of just one. Okay, and this kind of shows you, right, the sender of the information encrypts it with the public key. The message is scrambled. It's a cipher message that can't be read if you don't have the private key to decrypt it. A lot of organizations use public key encryption. So when you're sending data, I use Target as an example, but most large companies utilize public key encryption so that when you are ordering from their websites, the financial data, all of the order information that you're sending is encrypted with their public key encryption. And they can give that public key out to anybody, but you can't decrypt it unless you have the private key, and they keep that hidden. They keep that, you know, inside the organization with the recipient. Okay. Other technologies include digital certificates. Digital certificates are ways of verifying you are who you say you are. There's a trusted third party or a certification authority, or CA, who validates the identity of the user, actually validates and says you are, you are Target Corporation, and we're giving you this certificate so that you can prove to others that you are who you say you are. So when you're doing business with them, and the thing about the digital certificates is that your browser checks for the authenticity of these certificates without you really having to do anything. It's one of those things that happens, it's kind of behind the scenes, that the user usually doesn't see. Same thing with the encryption. This happens without the user really having to do anything. Okay. So this is a visual of digital certificates. Right? You have an institution as an individual. You guys can all go and get a digital certificate that verifies you are who you say you are. So when you send emails, right, it always comes from, you can verify that it comes from you. You can request a certificate, right? It goes to the CA, the Certification Authority, who will send that certificate to you. Your certificate has a serial number, it has an issuer name, it has an expiration date on it, it has other information on here, and so that you can, when you're exchanging information with others, you're sending data, you can use that digital certificate to verify that you are who you say you are. Organizations also have to ensure that systems that they use are available. Okay, online transactions, right? The expectation is that anytime you need these systems, they should be up and available. Okay, there are some systems called fault-tolerant systems that have this continuous availability because those systems are so important, like the stock market, right? That's one of those systems that you don't want that system to crash. There's so much riding, so much money and economies that are riding on that system that it has to be a very fault-tolerant system. It has to be able to keep running and be available at all times. Okay. You also have this high availability computing, computers that can recover quickly from some kind of crash. So if there is some sort of crash of the system, things happen. Servers, hardware fails, things happen. So if you actually have some kind of crash or some kind of break in availability, if you have this systems that are high availability computing systems, they should be able to recover very quickly after something like that happens. It minimizes but does not eliminate downtime. Okay, so it doesn't eliminate downtime completely, and a lot of times organizations like Amazon and Google, organizations that really can't afford to ever be offline, they have redundancy built into their systems. So they have thousands of servers that are redundant to one another, so if there's a server that goes offline or crashes, it's not going to bring down the whole system. Okay, that's usually how these large organizations deal with these types of potential issues. Okay, recovery-oriented computing, which is systems that are designed to quickly recover, and also to help operators pinpoint where the issues are. So they actually help individuals to find, where are the issues in the system so that they can be fixed quickly. Okay. Security in the cloud. Now, if a part of your infrastructure as an organization is cloud-based, the nature of having a cloud-based architecture is that part of your systems, your data, your capabilities are in somebody else's hands. They're hosted on somebody else's servers. Okay, so you usually have service level agreements between the organization and the cloud provider that will dictate how the security of this information, how available it is, stuff like that. Okay, because you're basically placing the security of your data and your resources into the hands of another organization. Okay. Mobile platforms do offer additional security issues, right? Making resources available to employees, to customers using mobile devices. You can have, making sure that smartphones actually have security, in them. Now, you don't usually think about having antivirus on your smartphone, but when you really think about it, these mobile devices are small computers, right? And like any other computer, they can catch viruses. It's not necessarily that they can't catch viruses, it's that hackers were not previously making viruses for those devices. But now with the kind of explosion of mobile devices and access to systems using these devices, you have more hackers that are targeting those types of devices. And then, of course, ensuring software quality. Now, we all know that no software goes out at 100% bug-free, right? And because of that, organizations have to have metrics to measure what are some of the what is quality systems and software, right? So you can look at some of the metrics could include number of transactions, online response time, right? How quickly should a system respond to a user request? Payroll checks printed per hour, right? That could be a metric that you use. Known bugs per 100 codes of line, right? For 100 lines of code, that could be, a metric that's used. Different levels of testing to make sure that that you don't have bugs. Walkthroughs, and we'll actually get into this in a little bit more detail toward the end of the class when we talk. We have a whole chapter about software development methodologies, and we'll actually talk about some of this, debugging and some of this stuff in a little bit more detail.